Everyone. There's plenty of seating, especially down in the front, right? So if any of you are standing in the back, I'll turn that off so it doesn't echo too much. If any of you are standing in the back and want to sit down front, please, of course, feel free to filter on down. Plenty of seating in the front. My name's Don Pohl. I'm the president here at Ranken Technical College. Welcome to each and every one of you. I see a lot of familiar faces out there in the crowd, so I'll ask the question, how many of you are graduates of Ranken? Okay, very good. And I know we've got some students. How many of you is your first time here at Ranken? Very good. Well, of course, we love new visitors, and we always like to welcome back our graduates. I will tell you, I know you've got a pretty packed schedule today, but you're welcome back anytime. We've been here since 1907, very rich history. We'd love to have you visit our campus. Not only here, but at any of our locations, which now include Wentzville, Troy, Perryville, and Ashland, Missouri. So we've grown quite a bit since a couple of years ago. We continue to grow, which is great. Just a little brief thing about Ranken. For those of you who have not been here before, you know the best way to introduce Ranken to anyone is to talk about our mission. And that defines who we are. We're very mission-driven, and it states that we are a private, non-for-profit, degree-granting institution of higher learning whose primary mission is to provide the comprehensive education and training necessary to prepare students for employment and advancement in a variety of technical career fields. And we're very excited that architecture has had a very rich history at this institution, and we continue to have a great architectural program. So before I get too deep into it, I would like to give a shout out to all of the faculty within the architecture program. So if you're a faculty member in architecture, whether it have been past, present, adjunct, full-time, doesn't matter, raise your hand if you taught here for. So let's give all of them a round of applause. At the end of the day, our faculty and our students are our most important asset that we have here. So enough about me, enough about Ranken. It's my pleasure to introduce two very special guests that we have here today. Of course, Tony AIA earned a degree in architecture from Ranken in 1991. Now I know when you hear that, some people are like, wow, 1991 wasn't that long ago, right? 1991, right here in this campus. Now, of course, in 1991, this facility was Raskin's Dairy. Literally, this particular was a loading dock that we turned into of course, the dairy itself is an educational facility. The cold storage warehouse is a 210-bed residence hall. But I remember those days. That wasn't that long ago. He has since earned his architectural license in Missouri and other states, and has spent more than 30 years working in the field. In 2021, Tony was promoted to technical principal of HOK's St. Louis office. In this role, Tony oversees more than 80 architects and designers, ensuring their work meets technical standards for safety, quality, and constructability. Of course, Tony, welcome back to campus. Let's give him a round of applause for Tony. And our other guest, which is first time to Ranken campus, so welcome, is Kimberly
Thank you. Thank you, President Paul. It's great to be back here at Ranken. Come back a couple times since my graduation. Not quite often enough, but thanks for everybody for being here. We're going to keep this pretty informal, just a conversation. Towards the end of it, we'll allow the audience to participate and ask any questions that they may have. I look forward to the event afterwards with the juniors and seniors, their show. I mean, from what I've seen, there's some really talented stuff out there. So I think with that, we could just kind of dive right into it. So Kimberly, could you tell us a little bit about your journey and what brought you to the architecture field?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I should turn on my mic here. Is that better? Great. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. Thank you, Tony. And thank you, Ranken, for having me. It's wonderful to be here. So where did I start? My life began in Detroit, Michigan. And originally I wanted to be a doctor, but at age 11, I had an epiphany. So downtown Detroit in the early 90s, or as younger people call it, the late 1900s. It looked pretty desolate. A lot of really grand old buildings, not unlike St. Louis. A lot of really grand old buildings had been, shuttered, and lots of graffiti and broken glass. And at a certain point, I realized, actually, I just learned what an architect was in a middle school art class. So that's one of the reasons why I think arts and education, K-12 education, is so important. So with that knowledge of what an architect was or is, I decided, well, if I became an architect and helped to repair these buildings, that could actually help to heal the community. So it's almost like being a doctor for the built environment, which would help the people who live in the community. So that was kind of the epiphany moment I had. There was a specific department store, not unlike I think there's a department store downtown St. Louis. I think it's like Mays something or another.
Macy's.
Oh, well, it's now Macy's, but originally it was something else. Anyway, the point is, I think you know what I'm talking about. So in Detroit, we had a building like that. It was called the Hudson's Department Store, and it closed the year that I was born. But lots of my older family members, they talked about that's where they went to see Santa, and that's where they got all of their, all their stuff, right? It was a full city block in downtown Detroit. But I never experienced it as a place of commerce. It was just this sort of like giant symbol of, Detroit's decay and disinvestment. And so, when I was 11, I saw this building, and I sort of made the connection between architecture and health and the city, kind of rebirth, in the future. And that's when I decided to be an architect. So, I went off to architecture school, and actually at this point I've now lived in 7 different cities, so I've had a lot of experiences in a lot of different places. The thing that I think is so great about architecture is that, at its best, it really can help to elevate the human experience. And you've seen cities that take architecture very seriously and invest a lot in that kind of infrastructure. I've lived in New York, and I currently live in Chicago, and you can see that. And I want all cities to really be able to, to have a greater appreciation for not just the beauty of the architecture, but how it actually helps to make people feel it. In fact, I was just sharing a story yesterday about how I was meeting with a mayor of a small town in Louisiana, Monroe, Louisiana, and his name is Mayor Friday Ellis. And Mayor Ellis said, "See beautiful, feel beautiful." And I thought that was really profound. It's like, when you see beauty, you feel that too. And so I've always been interested in helping to kind of bring that beauty and, frankly, care into our cities. And so, yeah, the origin story is Detroit, but, having lived in so many different cities, it really kind of reinforces the importance of architecture and, the work that we do. And then part of what I've done over my career is I've been very invested in helping to improve diversity within the field of architecture. I served on the National Board for NOMA, the National Organization for Minority Architects, very early in my career. And, through that work, I've really, been able to understand how important it is for architects to reflect the communities that they serve. And so a lot of communities that really need that kind of care and that, to see more beauty, they're not seeing people, invest in those communities. And even if there are architects that come in, they don't necessarily relate to that community as well. So that's some of the But now I actually have a question for Tony. Tell us about your post-Ranken journey, because I know that you graduated from here in the late 1900s, and you had a very successful career.
It's better than the early 1900s.
So we'd like to hear about it. Tell us, Tony.
Well, so I graduated, obviously in 91. And it was right at that time there was a downturn in the economy, and so I was having a hard time finding a job. And I started out, graduated in May, and back then there was no internet, so you had to go. So I drove from office to office, handing out my resume, filling out applications. It just wasn't picking up any speed, wasn't getting anything. So luckily by early September of that year, I received a call from a firm, a design build firm over in Illinois. Started working there. I was like, I'll take it now. Doesn't matter. Just wanted to get a job and get started. Worked there for 9 years. While I was there was a gentleman who left HOK and came to that firm and was leading one of the departments. He brought a friend of his from HOK over to work for that firm as well. He didn't like it too much. 6 months later, he went back to HOK. So he and I stayed in touch, and then he's like, hey, are you looking? Would you be interested in? We're looking for architectural or AutoCAD specialists. So I was like, yeah, I'll come and look, see what you got. And so, the rest is history. I started there in 2000. Been there for 23 years now. Was just a draftsperson starting out. Worked my way up to project architect. Luckily, I found a mentor who highly suggested I pursue my licensure, which at that time I was like, what? What? Didn't know anything about it really. It wasn't something I was even considering. But I did it, got it done. Started leading projects as a project architect, and then eventually senior project architect, working on some of the larger projects in the office. And then, a few years ago, taking on the technical principal role in our office. And as Dr. Pohl said, or Professor Pohl said, that just my main role now is basically just helping staff. Helping them with technical issues and code issues, making sure that the documents are the quality they need to be before they go out the door. It's a kind of a serious issue, and health, safety, and welfare is very important. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. That's why we're here today. So, my question for you, you had talked about earlier about, obviously AIA and NOMA. I recently got, a couple years ago, involved in NOMA. So I'm kind of curious of why these organizations have been so important for you in your career.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. You mentioned mentorship a few moments ago, and that's really kind of what it came down to for me. That when I first joined NOMA in 2004, which is 20 years ago, which is like crazy how quickly the time went by. But I was a student at that time, and actually I only joined because you had to be a member to enter the student design competition. I was like, okay, fine. So I went, with my classmates, and actually everyone was from the same class, but from the group of folks from my school, we competed in the competition that year, and the conference was in New York City, so it was like, I think, one of my first times visiting the city, and this big conference. And so it was really, it was just like a major kind of moment in my early career at that point. And I, of course, did the competition, but then I met people who were, who eventually became mentors of mine, who really helped to drive my career. In fact, I still talk to them to this day. I talked to one of my mentors just last evening, and to have people sort of in your corner to kind of help coach you and help you navigate things. And at this point now, 20 years, it's been really priceless. And so that was kind of the NOMA experience for me very early on. And then once I graduated from architecture school, that's when I joined AIA. So a quick plug for those who are graduating. You actually can, at this point in time, you can DC. And there was a gentleman who actually worked at HOK in the Atlanta office, and he suggested that I come to HOK, which, you know, I worked for a mid-sized firm at that point, but HOK is a very large firm. I didn't necessarily see myself doing that. I hadn't really thought about it. It was just something someone suggested. So I gave it some thought, but then I asked my mentors, and they're like, oh yeah, HOK is an amazing firm. They do all these really good projects. And again, if you don't know, you don't know. And so when people are there to help inform you, that's how you have information. So that's actually how I got to HOK. I moved to New York in 2008, which was not a great time to move to New York. It was like before things happened. But it was a difficult time in the sense that towards the end of that year, so that was my first role with HOK. Towards the end of that year, people started to, like, the profession started to, or many firms, I should say, started to shrink their staff, and HOK was a part of that. But because I had many mentors and sponsors, even, like, I was able to kind of navigate through that successfully. And so I think that's one of the sort of valuable pieces of joining these organizations, having a network, having a sort of a growing set of resources and a support system to help you navigate challenges, which massive recession is a major challenge. And so being able to have someone advocate for you and have people to just answer your questions about those kinds of things has been really important. And eventually I left HOK and then came back to what's called a boomeranger, like your colleague that you mentioned who left and came back, because it's a great place to work. But the in-between time, I continued to serve on the NOMA National Board. I was a university liaison, so at that point in time, like as a relatively new graduate, I served to help make sure that students in my region were able to enter the student design competition. I helped to address their challenges or answer their questions. And then because I had to get licensed, because my mentors wouldn't let me not get licensed, I decided that I actually couldn't serve on the NOMA board anymore, because I couldn't do that and have a full-time job and do my exams at the same time. It was just like too much. So I was like, sorry, NOMA, I'm going to have to now step away for after 4 years of service. So I did that, and what did I do after that? So I got licensed, and then, oh gosh, I'm like losing my voice. Sorry, one second. I got licensed, and then I'm like, what do I do now? And then generally when people don't know what to do, they go to graduate school. So that's what I did. That is what I did. I studied public administration. I got a scholarship. Actually, I did a fellowship program, which paid for that, which was very helpful. And then I ended up going back to Detroit. So actually, some people ask me, why did you study public administration? And my answer to that, as an architect, is buildings are a part of the public realm. Like, the buildings that we interface with are, kind of public. Obviously, many of them are privately owned, but we all are impacted by the built environment. And policies actually really shape a lot of what happens, who gets funding for it. And so there's actually a pretty close connection between policy design and how that relates to the buildings that we all get to experience. So that was what I focused on in graduate school, and then actually went back to Detroit after a 14-year East Coast tour, as I like to call it, in 2015. And I worked in city government. I worked in the Housing and Revitalization Department for the city of Detroit for about a year, and worked on policy issues and figuring out which development projects should get funding, and where those projects should, which neighborhoods needed the most investment, those kinds of things. So that kind of allowed me to use my design thinking skills in a slightly different context. And then I got a call. Well, actually, no, after I sort of ended my service with the city of Detroit, I actually did some small-scale real estate development to kind of do, some urban infill and housing revitalization or neighborhood revitalization work. And I also taught architecture and urban planning at the University of Michigan. So it was a very active time in between my HOK stints. So I ended up coming back to HOK in 2019 in the Chicago studio. But something happened. I got a phone call in 2016. It was August 26, 2016. Basically saying, we need you to run for NOMA president. And I was like, what? Like that? Like, I haven't been on the board in a number of years, and I don't, like, why are you asking this? And they're like, well, we haven't had, many women presidents really, demonstrated the value of the organization. We spoke up when, there was a lot of, sort of racial turmoil in 2020, and I think that's when we really saw our numbers, see an uptick. And it's important to have an organization, like NOMA, to really speak up when there are issues that need to be addressed. But, NOMA was actually born out of AIA. So at the AIA conference in Detroit in 1971, there was a group of minority architects who got together and said, AIA is a wonderful resource. That's why we're here at this conference. But we need more. Like we need to do something else that specifically caters to the issues of that time. Particularly black firms that were not getting access to economic opportunity, and we're seeing discrimination, those kinds of things. That's kind of the genesis of NOMA. But those NOMA members are still AIA members, and so to this day, I've been a NOMA member and an AIA member, and Tony, I appreciate your membership for both. And a lot of people do both because yes, the AIA is the voice of architects, but sometimes you need a more specific focus on issues that are acutely impacting people. That have issues around, race and gender and, all kinds of other, challenges. And so that's that's a big part of the reason why I stepped up to become AIA president is because, we never had a black female president of AIA. And, that was mentioned to me, and I thought, well, since, I can still maybe build from the momentum from the NOMA presidency, like this might be the moment for us to do it. And it's been 165 years, so I'm like, let's see what we can do. So thankfully, I was elected, and as was mentioned by President Cole, I was inaugurated 20 weeks ago, December 15th. And the reason why I know the number of weeks is because I do a post every week, and I say what number week it is. So this is week 20. And it's been an honor to one, be elected, but also to serve in this position. The mission of AIA is to empower and inspire architects to improve society and transform the world, which I think is pretty pretty noble and ambitious. But I think having an organization the size of AIA, we're at 98,000 members right now. We'd like to get to 100,000 members as I'm the 100th president. But to have that kind of, we're the largest design organization in the world. And so how can we leverage that to really help, to advance that mission, which is also very specifically focused on climate action and equity. And so when we think about equity, I give a lot of kudos to, the current leadership of NOMA who's really driving that agenda forward. So, oftentimes you just, you have to, it's like, there's a quote, I don't know who made the initial quote, but it's if everything is important, nothing's important. So you do have to focus, you do have to prioritize things. And so AIA is prioritizing, of course, serving our members, being a voice for the profession, climate action, and to some extent equity, but AIA can't do it all. And so that's one of the reasons why NOMA has been such an important voice. And there are other organizations that take on certain things that AIA also can't do, but the question is about AIA and NOMA, so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, great. So one of the things you mentioned, the number of memberships up to 100,000. Are there other specific goals that you're trying to accomplish as the president this year?
Yes, so I love alliteration and I like to rhyme. So my sort of slogan for this year is more in 24. That is what I would like to accomplish. More of what you might ask. Three things: more money, more members, and more mission. More money. Architects, our starting average salaries are far below what they should be compared to the amount of time and effort that goes into the education, the amount of loans that people generally have to take out, and then also even when you get licensed, which on average it takes about 13 years to get licensed, average salaries for architects are just below where they really should be. So I think as a profession, we have to better articulate our value and demand that value so that we can actually recruit and retain the very best talent. So we're very actively working on, advocating for architects, helping to raise certain fee caps, helping to, reduce expenses in certain ways. So that's something we are really trying to move the ball forward on this year, more in 24. More money. More members, as I mentioned earlier. At the end of last year, we had 98,000 members. We're hoping to, we will get to 100,000 members this year. We're just going to declare that. So that's why all the students who are graduating, please are wide awake at the wheel, and we are doing the work to advance our mission. And then more mission, as I mentioned, I already did the, I already said the mission, but actually I'll say it again. The mission of AIA is to empower and inspire architects to transform, to improve society and transform the world. And we do that in so many different ways. I mean, here, how many people from the AIA St. Louis chapter? Thank you for your membership. I'm really looking forward to learning more about specifically what AIA St. Louis is doing, but I'm sure it's really great. But we have an event later, so I haven't had a chance to do a full download on the specific initiatives. But if you're curious, talk to one of the people who just raised their hands. But we have 205 chapters all around the world, obviously primarily in the U.S., but we're growing internationally. And each chapter is really moving that mission forward in their own unique way that's special to their community's needs. And then we have our board level committees. A couple that I'll speak to that kind of tie to our strategic plan are the Committee on Climate Action and Design Excellence, as well as the Equity and the Future of Architecture Committee. And so just trying to be really focused on advancing those types of initiatives that are sort of bubbling up from those committees is important. And we also have a series of knowledge communities throughout the AIA network that focus on very specific types of projects or types of practice. So those are some of the things that we're doing to kind of advance the mission. But we don't want to be overly prescriptive, but we do want to make sure that people are leveraging their talent, expertise as architects to help to make the world a better place.
Great. So as far as, I guess something of an exception in the architecture field, as a black woman representing less than 1/2 of 1% of licensed architects, has that had an effect on your role as AIA president?
Yeah. There are about 120,000 licensed architects in the United States total. So we're actually a relatively small profession. There are more lawyers just in the state of California, just for reference. Of that number, just over 2,500 are black architects. And of that number, that number, there's just over 600 black women. So if you do the math, it's like just under 0.5%. And there are so few of us, most of us know each other. I'm number 295 in that. We know each other, we know our number, which is ridiculous. Anyway, and so what it means is we have to do better. We have to make sure that we are not just providing awareness of architecture. K-12 education is one way to do that. And in fact, I was just sharing yesterday that I had an opportunity for Architecture Week, which was just a few weeks ago. I spent some time at my old elementary school in Detroit, and I got to speak with 3rd graders about architecture, and they had never met an architect, and certainly not someone who went to their school. And so that was like a really amazing moment, just to kind of see the energy on their little faces, and also know, if they want to, become an architect, there's someone out there who looks like them. There's someone out there who's literally comes from where they come from. And they don't come from a place where that's very common. I mean, I went to drive by the house that I used to live in, and it had been demolished. So that gives you a sense of the context of the neighborhood. Not a lot, from an economic standpoint going on. That was great. So, knowing that these kids are exposed to that very early on is wonderful. But then on the other side of it, we have to make sure that they're coming into a profession where, they'll feel welcome, and they'll feel like they can thrive and belong, but also where they can be compensated fairly, especially compared to other things that they can do. In fact, when I was, I mentioned I had decided when I was 11 to become an architect, and then my older brother, who's 15 years older than me, a few years later when I was in high school, he's like, all right, what are you doing? Are you sure you want to be an architect? And I was like, yeah. He's like, I'm telling you, you're not going to make any money. He literally said that. And I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. And then I got into architecture, and I was like, oh. Kind of right. But, it does get better, but that is a barrier. So how many, high school students heard that from a sibling or a parent or a mentor, and they're like, I'm just going to go be a doctor. So, when I think about, fostering a sense of belonging, but also making sure that the economics make sense, those are the things that come to mind to make sure that those third graders who, in however many years, would be in a position to choose architecture, that, it's a decision that makes sense. So that's what we're working on. And then the other thing, to kind of get back to your actual question, which veered off a little bit, but coming back. I think about when I was first elected, and it was like June of 2022, a few weeks later I got an email from a second-year student at an HBCU, a young woman, and she wrote like a whole letter to me, just basically congratulating me, but also saying, because you won, I feel like my dreams are more possible. And that, like, I literally started like crying immediately. It was just like such a moment where I was like, okay, this is like, I mean, it was already real, but this is like super real now. Like, don't mess up at all. So, I mean, the point I'm trying to make is, it's an honor to serve as AIA president, no matter what your gender or race or background is. But I think to be the first of something and, what it represents, it really does, that makes it an especially high honor. And, yes, there's a lot of pressure that comes with it, but, I've been sort of trained to do this because I was already president of something before, so that's helpful. But, I've received so much support and encouragement from people, so that has been very helpful. And, I think that hopefully for the, for the next, the next series of president people, or I know we're in election season right now, so we have, a wonderful set of folks who have decided to run. In this case, it's actually three men, so we'll see who wins that, but it'll be a man. But actually, for the first time in history, AIA has elected 3 women in a row. So the president before me is a woman, Emily Ranken Bryce, and then there's me, Kim, and then next year, Evelyn Lee will be president, and then the year after we'll have a male. But and we'll have a great choice no matter who's elected. And then who knows what will happen for 2027, but I'm hoping that other people will sort of see me in this position and say, I would like to, step out there, and maybe we'll have our first, Latina or Latino president, maybe we'll have our first, there are all these different, firsts that are opportunities, and so how do we make sure those people feel encouraged to do that? And so not just, for the benefit of Black women, but for the benefit of people who haven't seen themselves represented, to say, I can do that too. So, question now for you. Diversity goes beyond just race and gender. And I know I talk a lot about race and gender, but it also includes accessibility. And so, Tony, would you just kind of speak to us from your perspective, relative to inclusion and belonging, and how you've sort of navigated that throughout your career?
Well, it's, accessibility and challenges go hand in hand. I think to quote your favorite movie, it's like peas and carrots.
Yes. Oh, my favorite movie is Forrest Gump, by the way. So we talked about that yesterday. So.
Yeah. So when I started at Ranken, my fall year of '88, it was a 2-year program at that time, and if you were, and I think it's probably still the same, if you missed so many days, you were basically expelled. And so the first month of my second year, I was in an automobile accident. I was a passenger in the car. And so I was in, the hospital and physical rehab for 3 months. So I would have to start my school over again. And at that point, I didn't know. I had to make a decision. What are you going to do? Are you going to go back to school, or are you just going to? So, I made a decision at that point. I need to go back to school. Reached out to Ranken at that time, and I think even the physical therapist met with Ranken, because this was pre-ADA. So nobody, unless it was the ABA, the American Barriers Act, nobody knew much about, the ADA. The buildings at Ranken were, built way before that. The Finney building, the main building, was where the architecture program is. It was on the 3rd floor. So Ranken made put in, there was a janitor's closet that they changed to an accessible restroom. You know, there's a couple of students that were in my class that volunteered to help me get to the classroom, because again, it was on the second floor. The building connected to it, there was a bridge, and it's still there. That there was a freight elevator, you know, there was that's where the trades were, the carpentry and electrical, HVAC. There was a service elevator that had those big vertical opening doors, so there was no way I was going to be opening those doors. So, you know, every day for 5 days out of, you know, 9 months, 2 students would meet me. We'd go up the elevator, go across the bridge. Then there's, you know, the issue of getting upstairs to the architecture program. Ranken purchased a stair climber. If you can imagine, like those caterpillar tracks that are on a tank. So this thing I'd transfer over to it, and one student would, you know, guide it up the stairs. The other student would grab my chair, bring it up. You know, we're doing that 3-4 times a day. You know, it's you know, cafeteria's on the first floor, so you get lunch, go to the restroom, it's on the second floor. So, but, you know, we dealt with it. Thanks for Ranken, because who knows what would have happened. I guess I would have had to go to Carbondale or something. No offense. So, you know, fast forward 30 years, you know, it's gotten a lot better, especially because of the ADA. But there's still challenges out there. You know, I deal with them every day. I mean, last year I went to a conference in Chicago. Got there the night before. Was going to go get something to eat. I was looking for a sports bar. You know, I could have a couple of adult beverages and watch a hockey game. Open the door to go in. It's a nice stairway. Look to the left, look to the right. There's no lift. I'm like, well, I guess I'm not going here. So, you know, the hotel, this seems to happen quite a bit. I think with the hotel rooms, they have accessible rooms, roll-in showers. You know, they're 5 foot long, 3 foot deep. Well, the bench is on the left side of the shower. The shower handles and controls are on the right side of the shower. My arms aren't that long. You know, so you have to, you know, you have to make do. You know, it's still that way. I mean, things that you know, you have to deal with. You know, this week, this week, you know, HOK St. Louis is in the process of looking at our, you know, our leases due at the end of this next year, and we're looking at other options, just exploring, see what else is out there. We visited 6 buildings this week. 3 of them had accessibility issues. You know, one of them, you know, get out of the car, go across the street to go over there. There's no curb cut. Like, how is that even possible? Now, this is this week. You know, there was one building that, and most of these buildings, again, they're all existing buildings built way back when. So, you know, it's not so much an issue now with accessibility, but the existing buildings are still a problem. Restaurants, you know, there's lots of restaurants in St. Louis that they just can't get in. Or can't get in the front door, but hey, we got a back door here where the deliveries are made. You can come in back there. Oh, okay. And then there's, you know, there's restaurants you can get in, but then the restroom may not be accessible. So, or, you know, the men's isn't accessible, but the women's is accessible. So you can use the women's. Great. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, and it's not just the physical either. I mean, there's a, you know, visually impaired, you know, hearing impaired people. I'm sure there's people in this audience that are dealing with some type of disability. You can't visibly see it, but it's there. And there's always going to be that challenge.
So would you say that's part of why it's important to have diverse perspectives on the design team? Because I imagine there are so many things you've caught
Absolutely.
over the years that, you know, just given your life experience, you're like, actually this would not work at all. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and you know, right now, just doing QC on drawings, I can just look at it, that shower's not going to work. You can't do that. Just because I know typically how people in chairs are going to, you know, get into that space and transfer from one, you know, from a chair to the other thing or whatever it is. I can just, you know, see it a little bit easier than most people can. again, it's a challenge, but it's definitely a lot better than it was.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you said that once you understand it, then you'll look for it later. So one thing I did mention early in my career, I worked on a project for deaf students at Gallaudet University, which is the nation's premier university for the deaf. And I didn't know anything about deaf culture or specific needs, but after having worked on that project, I'm just aware of it. And so having different types of experiences to really interface with people who are navigating certain challenges, I think that's so important. So definitely, as for the students out there, as you're looking to develop your career, try to find different types of projects to engage with, so it really expands your understanding of the power of design, and really increases your intentionality around your design process.
So I think we're starting to get a little close on time. A couple quick questions for you before we open it up to the audience. Recently, the Wall Street Journal wrote a piece about how St. Louis epitomizes the doom loop with vacant buildings and storefronts downtown. I know Detroit experienced this, quite a few years ago, declared bankruptcies. Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, you've been to Detroit. What do you see is working in Detroit that could be utilized in St. Louis to help in that?
Yeah. Well, Detroit and St. Louis are different, but also they're not so different. So I'll talk a little bit about what I've seen over the course of my life. Having seen Detroit at sort of in a way kind of like rock bottom in the 80s and 90s, and things were still pretty rough in the early 2000s, and I mean it certainly hasn't arrived, right? Although we did have a really great NFL draft last week, I don't know how many but I mentioned the Hudson's department store. It was demolished, I think in the mid 90s, but it's now under construction. They just topped out a few weeks ago for the second tallest tower in Michigan. So that's a good comeback story. Detroit is definitely a comeback city, and I know that can be true for St. Louis. And it's always terrible to read in some national or international publication that your city is doomed. I mean, that's awful. But Detroit declared bankruptcy, a little over a decade ago, and look where it is now. And I'm not suggesting that that's not. I'm just giving an example of what has happened in my hometown. And so I think part of the key to any city's health is strong leadership. And I don't know much about your mayor, so I'm not making any specific comments, but I will say that the mayor of Detroit has been in office for several terms now and has really developed relationships that have helped to bring investment into the city, so that's been helpful. And again, things aren't perfect in Detroit, but I think things are trending in the right direction given some of the great press that the city has gotten recently, and just generally good things have been happening, which takes a lot of patience. In fact, I'll go back to my 4 C's. So I talked about yesterday in a presentation to my office at HOK, foreseeing the future. And there are 4 words that come to mind because I like rhyming and alliteration and all that stuff. So 4 C's. The first is curiosity. The second is creativity. The third is courage. And the 4th is consistency. So how do you foresee the future? You have to ask the right questions. You have to be curious about how do we specifically fix this issue. You have to be creative about addressing those issues. You have to have the courage to ask for help, find the resources, bring people together, have the difficult conversation. And you have to do that consistently over and over and over again. So I appreciate leaders who are able to do that, and I encourage you wherever you are in your career journey to do those things. That's been sort of the key to my success, I would say. And so I appreciate that leadership in Detroit has done that, and I think that has made a big difference. The other thing I think is really important in the context of cities, and I learned a lot of this in my graduate program that dealt with public administration, but tri-sector collaboration is really important. So what does that mean? So the three different sectors: the public sector, so like government, the private sector, individual companies like private companies, and the philanthropic sector or the not-for-profit sector. Those who receive dollars from all different sources that can actually help to meet certain needs or fill certain public sector just doesn't have the money for, and the private sector may not have the appetite for. So that's kind of where the philanthropic sector can come in to collectively sort of say, we really want to restore this particular building, or revitalize this particular neighborhood, and get really committed people who are great problem solvers together to help do that. But you do need those three sectors to work together. One of the major initiatives that I've been driving through the AIA this year, which kind of started a little bit last year in my president-elect year, is the Chief Architect Initiative. So oftentimes when you're president-elect, you don't have like a lot that you're expected to do, but generally if the president isn't able to do something, you sort of fill in. So last year I had the great fortune of getting called to to fill in for the president at the U.S. Conference of Mayors event in early 2023. And so I was just meeting with the AI staff about what are we going to talk to the mayors about? Like what's our message? What is there an ask, or like what are we? I had two minutes on stage to talk to like the mayors of America, which I was a little nervous about. And I was like, what am I going to say? So in this meeting, I just sort of thought, so that's the curiosity. What will I say to the mayors of America? So that was the curiosity. The creativity was, well, how many mayors in the U.S. currently have a chief architect? And I'm sort of familiar with the chief architect concept because an internship that I had in college was with the U.S. General Services Administration in the Office of the Chief Architect. And that was during my time in D.C. And so AI staff member said, most cities don't have a chief architect, but it actually used to be a very prevalent position throughout the U.S., but it went away maybe like 50, 60 years ago, so it's not as common of a thing. And I was like, well, I think that should be the ask. So that's the current, right? Let's ask the mayors of America to allocate budget, which they may or may not have, probably don't have, to hire an architect to be their key advisor. And so I basically said to the mayors that year, or last year, architects are the civic problem solvers you didn't know that you needed. And I said some other stuff with the AIA and the work that architects do and how they should think about us a little bit differently than a person who designs their house. Like we do so many other things. And so what was interesting is a couple mayors came up to me. One mayor said, I actually have a chief architect and I don't know what I would do without my chief architect. Yes, I need you to repeat that on camera later. And then another mayor said, I came to this conference looking for a big idea. She's like, I think this is it. So I felt like that was a good sort of test of the concept. So we've been really focused on it this year, and I wrote an article recently, again, just sort of challenging us to, through our local chapters, to reach out to your mayor and say, hey, we have this initiative. We'd love for you to consider hiring a chief architect to be your key advisor on issues related to climate action, affordable housing, light reduction, urban infill, whatever the issues that are specific to your community, talk about those and how an architect can actually help to solve those issues. So yeah, that's the Chief Architect Initiative in a nutshell. But back to your question, which was about the doom loop. Does St. Louis have a chief architect? No? Well, there you go. Like that's going to be your solution, potentially. So I encourage you to do that. But the other sort of goal of the Chief Architect Initiative isn't necessarily just immediately get chief architects everywhere. The idea is to really elevate the potential of design and talk about the value that architects create. So even if you don't achieve that, which I recognize like budgets are tight, maybe you can get some architects on certain commissions or certain committees or in certain decision-making roles or boards. I think that's a great step, but sort of the high-level goal is to have someone to really be an advocate for design, an advocate for designers, but also to really help to think about the quality of the built environment for their city.
Great. So final question before we open it to the audience. There are many young aspiring architects and designers in this room. What advice do you have for them as they begin their journey?
Yeah. Well, I stole my own thunder. I forgot that I was supposed to do the 4 C's thing there. But so I won't repeat that. But basically, it all comes down to. Well, actually, I had a question from these young women, and they asked me, how do you navigate imposter syndrome? And so what I would say, what I said to them and what I'll say to this group is, you are where you are because you earned it. You are there for a reason. Take up the space that you need to take up. Be brave, and I guess I will repeat the 4 C's now, but be curious, be creative, be courageous, and be consistent. And be great. That doesn't start with a C, but be great.
All right, thank you. Is there any questions from anyone in the audience?
Would you practice in multiple different arenas in architecture? Which project or which sector had most long-lasting effect on you in your career?
Yeah, so for those who couldn't hear, the question was just given all the different things that I've had the opportunity to work on, which project has had the biggest impact. So actually, in between my time at HOK, I worked as an owner's rep, so as a real estate project manager, and helped to work directly with owners to hire architects and contractors and then manage their project, specifically focusing on project budget, schedule, quality of work. And this one particular project that I worked on in Newark, New Jersey, it was a park revitalization project. And that's actually where I got to see a public-private partnership really work well together. So the city of Newark, New Jersey, and then a couple large corporate entities who had a real interest in this park being successful because it would be sort of an asset for or a destination for their employees during lunchtime or just for events and things like that. They were invested, and then also the philanthropic community. So they all worked together really, really well to provide funding to reinvigorate this particular park. And it was really eye-opening just to see those different folks come to the table from their different perspectives to solve that particular issue. But to watch that park go from being basically kind of a dead space, it was a little scary. There were like drug needles and things like that were found in the grass before the project started. Certainly wasn't any place that you would want to walk at nighttime. So what we did was we really invested in A, security, B, lighting for the nighttime hours, beautiful flowers and public art, like all kinds of things to really make it, and I mentioned earlier, see beautiful, feel beautiful. I mean, the transformation of that park was really incredible. And we also built a comfort station, which is a fancy word for like bathrooms and a security booth. But it wasn't a booth, it was like a little building, little pavilion. And then there was a small restaurant of like a burger place. And so just to see the great care that had gone into making this, public park in downtown Newark a real destination for people, and to have, by the time it was all done, these beautiful flowers and seating, people playing chess. They programmed the park with like movies in the park, and they had a little free library. I mean, it was great to go from like nothing and actually like scared, like just avoid the park, people avoiding the park, to really the park being a magnet. I think that was also with like a fairly short period of time, because it was a park project. It wasn't like a giant tower or something that took like years and years and years to watch it happen. But I thought that was a really powerful moment about the power of design, the power of partnership, and to see it all kind of come together to create a destination. So I like to phrase things and kind of rooted in my early experience, like transitioning things from desolation to destination, because I like to run. But yeah, that was one of my favorite projects.
Any other questions?
Do you see AI as impacting profession?
Yes, absolutely. But unfortunately, no one knows what to do with it yet. Like we know that it's a problem, or it actually could be either a problem or an opportunity, a challenge or an opportunity. Hopefully, it is an opportunity, but I think there are a lot of people who are concerned about AI taking positions away from architecture firms. I mean, I think architects tend to be optimists, so I'd like to be optimistic that it's going to be transformative in the best possible ways, but we have to also be mindful of where there are risks, and I think we just don't know enough about how it will impact us just yet. I think we'll probably find out fairly soon, but it's like things are changing almost like every week or every month. There's like a new thing that we're trying to like wrap our minds around, but I know there are some very smart people who are working on that, so I'm waiting to get should know soon what we can do to help leverage AI for the best, or at least to help us mitigate some of the challenges it might create. But I think it's still a work in progress. But great question. I don't know.
CAD system is the profession going to? We're going to standardize on one system or
I mean, I feel like, well, I know at HOK and many other firms use BIM, Building Information Modeling, specifically Revit. So I feel like that's probably the most prevalent. But you know, there are lots of firms that I heard one firm is still using like MicroStation. I've actually never used that, so I don't know what that's about. But I think it's going to be hard to really require everyone to use one thing. But I think most people are using Revit.
Well, I'd like to thank you, one, for coming to St. Louis. My name is Demetrius Muhammad, Vice President of the NOMA chapter here in St. Louis. Thank you for your service in NOMA.
Thank you. Thank you for your current service.
Happy to see you as AAI President. My question to you is, if you spend a little time here in St. Louis and maybe drive through our neighborhoods, you're going to, you spoke about buildings. St. Louis has a lot of schools that are deteriorating. That's a problem. What do we do with it? How can the AIA help us, navigate the waters in St. Louis? Sometimes political. Everything is, community related. It's one of the things. I believe that if you want to have a strong city, you got to have a strong educational background and strong communities. And I also had that issue of walking into a classroom, first time I ever saw an architect, and to see the black architect, and people were kind of taken back.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. I think often now my answer to things, I'm not a politician. I think what a lot of politicians do, like whatever the question is, they answer it with like what they want you to hear. So I'm just going to say the Chief Architect Initiative is a great way to help advance those kinds of conversations. What do we do with these old school buildings? And I also hear part of your question is in reinvesting in education, but I think I assume that the population of St. Louis has gotten smaller, which is very similar. I mean, it's a very similar thing in Detroit. Lots of vacant school buildings. In fact, I was grateful that my elementary school was actually still standing and active because many other schools in Detroit had been shuttered, many have been demolished. And so I think, reinvesting in education and making the schools that still exist as strong as they possibly can be, but then also looking at those existing structures that are, continuing to decline because of being exposed to the elements. Their roofs have deteriorated, so then water's coming in. Basically find ways to stop that from happening. Repair the roofs and make sure you secure the perimeter, and find a new life for those projects. In fact, one of my favorite project types is adaptive reuse. I think in part rooted in my Hudson's department store story. But find ways to again preserve those buildings, because the most sustainable building is the one that already exists. And a lot of these school buildings, that were built 100 years ago, plus or minus, you can't even recreate those types of buildings anymore. Like the craftsmanship and just the materials are really hard to come by. And so, I mean, in an ideal scenario, you would get you'd get your chief architect on board, and they would help to kind of lead those efforts. But then you would get your public, private, and philanthropic sectors together to solve that issue. So the curiosity is, what do we do with these existing buildings that should have a future, but we don't have current programming? But then there are also all these needs, right? Affordable housing is a problem in most cities. Or we're seeing a lot of places, or a lot of cities bring in tech incubators, and there are a lot of things that I think are appropriate for the future that can sort of live in our buildings of the past. So asking those questions, getting your chief architect on board to help you, and having the courage to consistently to work on those projects so that you don't have that blight in those buildings that are kind of contributing to the decline of the larger context.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Well,
true. In fact, I was like featured in an article in Crane's Chicago Business, which is a magazine or like a weekly newspaper a few weeks ago, or actually last month. And it talked about the DEI backlash because I think there was a lot of support for DEI and making sure that we're being as a society and certainly within our companies and profession are being inclusive. But it seems like over the last 6 months or maybe a year, there's been a pendulum swing back to people being kind of like over DEI. I'm like, we still need to like talk about these issues, and I mean, unfortunately, a lot of DEI professionals have like those positions have gone away in certain companies. So that's something to be mindful of. But to kind of get back to the question about climate action and equity and how they intersect, I think about the places that are most vulnerable to climate action, and they're often places that are under-resourced, and unfortunately they're also communities of color. Actually, I was talking about earlier this morning about the life expectancy gap between the north side of Chicago, which is predominantly white, and the south side of Chicago, which is predominantly black and brown. On the north side of Chicago, certain zip codes within the same city, the life expectancy is about 90 years. And then on the south side, again, certain zip codes, that average life expectancy is 60 years. So that's a 30-year life expectancy gap, like average life expectancy gap. And I don't know the numbers for St. Louis, but I feel like there are probably some similar dynamics. And oftentimes you'll find that the neighborhoods that are exposed to more sort of toxic waste, or that are kind of in the less favorable parts of the city, are communities of color. So thinking about how do we address that from a policy standpoint, or providing resources to really support those communities that are most vulnerable, which I mean to some extent so basically when there are climate events, the communities that are less able to recover are often communities of color. So I think that's where those two intersect, and so that's why it's important to have architects and engineers and all types of professionals who are able to sort of assess those issues and help to provide solutions. Again, the curiosity piece, the creativity, like how do we design for life? How do we, again, alliteration coming, how do we build for more birthdays? How can the people on the south side of Chicago, or whatever the appropriate neighborhood for St. Louis is, how can those folks get from 60 to like 65 or like 70 years? You know what I mean? Like, so how do we answer those questions? How can our buildings be more appropriate for to deal with climate action, or to deal with climate change, I should say. And I remember when I was speaking on a panel in Madrid just 2 weeks ago, and someone suggested that the houses that people live in that are least efficient, from a energy standpoint or water standpoint, that they should pay more because they're creating more of the problem. But the reality is they can't afford to get the right types of windows and repair their roof, and so thinking about the specific needs of those communities that are under-resourced and finding ways to help them to provide those energy retrofits and to actually reduce their energy costs. Those are the kinds of things that we have to be mindful of. And so it requires people who are coming from those perspectives to say, hey, actually this is a problem that you may not have thought about, but by charging them more money, you're making it harder for them to have a more efficient home. Or just again thinking about things from a from a perspective that both centers the equity piece, but also thinks about the environment together. And so that's why it's important to have architects, specifically a chief architect. That has nothing to do with it, but I wanted to throw that in there. Having expertise in place that can help to connect the dots between the things that we're all really passionate about.
All right. Well, before I hand this back over to David Graff, the architecture department chair, I would like to thank AIA St. Louis, NOAA St. Louis, IIT, for, assisting to get this people together. Personally, I'd like to thank my HOK colleagues, Hunter, Shannon, Chad, and Margaret McDonald for helping pull this together. Thank you, Ranken, for making this happen, allowing us to be here in this beautiful space. But most importantly, Kimberly, thank you for taking the time to be here.
I'm happy to be back in St. Louis.
So, we appreciate it. Thank you.